Mike was considered to be what they call mata amigos.
Yeah.
Friend killer.
Yeah.
Because he would be the one that would, oversee how was one of his associates going to behave. And if he felt that he had too much power and he was getting a little bit on a high horse, he would kill him and all his associates.
It's amazing anybody works for you. Like it's counterintuitive because
sure
eventually they're going to the money talks.
They have a waiting list, to take those positions.
Yeah.
And it's the culture, especially for someone like in Mexico.
There's no lack of bodies ready to fall for these dudes. This guy's like, well, why would anyone work for you? It's called having nothing, bro. Figure it out.
Yeah.
And it's the culture, especially for someone like in Mexico, and you see it now more than ever. But again, American culture, right? A lot of the what's basically praised. And I always say this, that me and my brother have this saying that we were praised so long for doing wrong. And that's that's something hard to kind of change from. And today, we're considered to be, the worst kind, which I probably I would take each one of those labels because it's coming from people who have no idea.
Yeah. And
that's what he be yelling at in the chat, and that's what they be yelling at, when they come on here and defend themselves to the commenters and stuff like that. They'll take those labels because they're coming from people that have no idea the level they were on.
Life.
It's coming from people who have no idea. Probably I would take each one of those labels because it's coming from people who have no idea.
Yeah. And so life, after, when did you get out of prison?
I got out in 2020.
Okay.
I served 12.
Oh, great time to come out of prison.
That's pretty it was 12 years exactly. I turned myself in, November 30th.
Yeah, and you were married at that time because you said one of the reasons you wanted to get out of this was you had a wife. No, you said her father was a cop in the U.S. or in Mexico?
Well, just to give you, this is going to be weird, but both our father-in-laws are retired police officers.
You and your brother?
Yes.
Yeah.
We both, and for sure they had a significant impact in
police officers in Mexico or the U.S.? In the U.S., okay.
And we served the 12 years, and yes, I'm still, married to this day. Thank God. I think that, for the most part, I see to this day, I 100% think it was worth it.
Did you have kids?
Yes, I have 5 total.
5. Okay.
Who live a very different life. I know that it was worth it just because I see.
So you had them before you went in.
Yes.
Yeah, and that had something to do with it too.
Yeah, for sure.
Bro, this guy act like he wasn't there for this story.
My children, I have 3 who graduated from the university.
So you knew when you started to cooperate, it would reduce your sentence, but it wouldn't. I mean, 12 years is not nothing.
You know what, sir? I always, I've been on the other side of those cooperators, right, as well. But I always felt like, to me, it was a chance to kind of have a chance at life after all the destruction it caused. But at the same time, that's why I always emphasize, I had to be lucky every day for 7 months to be able to see a judge to receive the benefit of a sentence, which I was grateful for.
That sounds hard in itself. He had to be lucky every day for 7 months just for the opportunity to get in front of a judge to be able to get them benefits, and it still wasn't that easy. Got in front of a judge and waited 6 years before they caught Chapo, and cooperated for 6 years, and then another 6 years on top of that. It's a lot, man. It's a crazy story.
One last question, is really diving into the deterrence aspect. This gets to the policy. We've mostly, because I think the personal story is fascinating, so that's what we spend a lot of time on here. But one of the things we look at in law is to make fentanyl in particular just a higher sentence. You can classify it as a poison. You can do a number of things to make it a higher sentence. From the trafficker world, from the drug dealer world, if I say, look, okay, you get 10 years for dealing cocaine, okay, but if there's fentanyl in that cocaine, it's a murder penalty. If I did that in law, does that change your mindset on the street? Are you going to be like, got it, I'm going to make sure there's no fentanyl in this? Or do you just, or Now that being said, the fentanyl makes cocaine better, and so you can sell more of it. Is it worth the profit, or does that kind of deterrence in law perhaps have an effect?
I don't understand that, how it makes it better. I don't understand what's the whole purpose of them cutting it with that bullshit anyway. All it does is kill people, kill off your clientele. It's an upper and a downer. I don't get it. Like, I don't understand it. Maybe I'm stupid. I'm old. But it just seems like a counterintuitive. It seems like a planted. It's like they dropped the F-bomb on us. This is like crack all over again. This is to start something. This was implemented and pushed in. It's a numbers game. If you just think of the celebrities alone that have fallen on their face over this stuff. If that many celebrities fell on their face over it, regular people, the numbers is off the charts.
Is it worth the profit, or does that kind of deterrence in law perhaps have an effect on the dealer themselves and the distributors?
That's a great question. So off the top of my head, because I never considered that question, but first thing that comes to my mind, and I hope that's not the case. In 1980s, the crack was labeled a higher drug, a more popular drug. The disparity of sentences between raw cocaine and crack were far different, 10-1, I believe.
Yep.
All those laws are being changed to this day.
All those laws being rolled back. Got him.
Still, bunch of crack dealers. Still, no one's saying, "Oh, it's crack. I'm gonna stay away from it." I mean, maybe someone like me, I would. Like, for instance, what was considered fentanyl today, maybe that's the name of the drug. In my time, it was like considered to be China white. I felt like I didn't know the drug; it was too risky. It was it's a chemical drug that we had no idea about. I would stay away from it just because I know the repercussions that come with that. But it didn't stop me from selling other type of drugs. But I just hope that that's not the case 20 years from now, where we forget what fentanyl was, and then it's some other strong drug. And now we're reversing those, disparities in sentences or whatever the case is, because it's happening to this day. And I know it's, looking for an answer that could be like, well, we could punish as a deterrent. And we look back in the 80s, 90s, just my family being a part of that. Prisons are full. Right now, we're doing everything to get people out of prison for the same drugs that, the government was spending large amounts of resources to put them in. Now it's like redoing that. I think that there's more.
Bro, he just told you about yourself. It's been a failed experiment. This whole drug thing. We basically telling them none of that worked. Y'all changed the sentencing guidelines for crack, and now you're rolling those back because there's something worse here. And what happens in 20 years when that elephant tranquilizer is now the big scary monster that could wipe out a city block, and now you got to roll back the F guidelines because there's a new bad big drug in town.
About to put them in. Now it's like redoing that. I think large amounts of resources to put them in. Now it's like redoing that. I think that there's more to be talked about.
That being said, it did have a major effect on crack. I mean, it did. And violent crime in general went down.
Hey, Crenshaw, how much effect on crack did Oliver North, Ronald Reagan, Ricky Ross's plug, the CIA, and all of them, how much did they have to do with it?
Down a lot.
Yeah, I think that when it comes to the violent crime aspect, me being in prison, it's just how it changes that. A lot of people like glorify that they're violent or glorify what they have on the record. Yeah. That does change a little bit because it's like, these laws apply except for violent offenders. I think violence and drug trafficking, those laws have helped because, for instance, me, myself, I would rather lose $3 million, $5 million than resort to violence. One of the reasons, because that's not who me and my brother were, but also because we know that you could get away with selling drugs, but you can't get away with violence. The government is not gonna.
They drew a line in the sand early. They said, "What's bad for business? Bodies. All right, let's maneuver around those as much as possible."
Well, we would say play around or take there being a violent kingpin, in the city, and it's bad for business. So I do believe that when it comes to violence, those laws do help. Carrying a gun, it was a 5-year mandatory, statute mandatory, right? 5 years added to the sentence. That was common, like no one having a gun, like no guns around. It didn't, I'm not saying it didn't stop people from having them, but it made them think twice because that was a mandatory charge.
Right.
So I do think that those type of laws, those type of sentences do help. There is deterrence, there is change, because you're absolutely right. 80s was, early 90s, violence was, at an all-time high, and you see it kind of dwindle down a little bit.
Well, actually, this time, last question, then we got to go, is, you mentioned in our task force meeting how that the cartels are really terrified of the U.S. government. That if they're terrified of us focusing on them, taking the gloves off and coming after them, which honestly we've never really done, mostly because Mexico won't let us, in my opinion. Can you expound on that? Would that create a sense of deterrence if there was some kind of military cooperation between the U.S. government and the Mexican military?
Absolutely. I look at what's going on today, as I touched on it a little bit with the migration issues with the migrants, and that's being allowed by the Mexican drug cartel. And I think that's being actually, implored by them, like, yes, do it more, because it sees that it's creating problems for the government.
Did you hear what he just said? Did y'all catch that? He said that this whole thing we got going on here in this country with the migrants, that the cartel is encouraging that, if not sponsoring it. Oh, this is creating a problem for them? Cool, let's keep flooding these borders. Now, what happens in that case? Coyotes get rich. People get exploited. The U.S. is scrambling, trying to figure out what to do with them. They're in tents everywhere. How many soldiers are they not sending in? Who knows? But he said the cartel is with that.
That's being allowed by the Mexican drug cartel. And I think that's being actually, implored by them, like, yes, do it more, because it sees that it's creating problems for the government. I feel like because I was a part of those organizations, I know what type of power they have.
Disruption. This is what I was talking about when we covered that UFC fight earlier. Very much different story, you know what I'm saying? Much smaller in scale, but same thing in strategy, causing a disruption.
Where they could shut the water, the well off whenever they want. And I think that type of collaboration between military actors will terrify them. What type of impact could it have, like, on drug trafficking? I think it could have a significant impact. Nothing like that ever happened. For the most part, they're scared of U.S. prisons.
Yeah.
They're scared of seizures. There's, there are a lot of these decisions are done in a mountaintop with no running water, and the ones calling the shots. But I do think that they get away with what they can in Mexico.
Yeah.
But everyone knows that you're not going to get away with that in the United States.
Yeah. I was gonna. What's last question?
But I'm here for you, sir.
What's
like the most heart-wrenching, scariest moment you ever had dealing with these guys? I mean, you did tell me about a man who was skinned and still alive and chained to a tree. Can you beat that?
Well, because it wasn't me, yes. But I think for me, for the most part, in 2007, I was arrested by a corrupt law enforcement officer. My brother and I were arrested.
Yeah.
And the organization found out, called into the PGR office and demanded to speak to us. We offered them $10 million and they said no.
Was this in Mexico or
in Mexico? And
that's gonna happen here, huh? The organization's gonna find out in America that they got arrested by a couple police officers and call in and offer them 10 million? Stop, bro.
Every office, and demanded to speak to us. We offered them $10 million, and they said no.
Was this in Mexico or
in Mexico? And I get a phone call and said, well, you have a choice and a choice. Either you die fighting, or you come home, but there's no way we're gonna let you go. I think they were more terrified of me coming back to the United States and maybe cooperating or something like that. At that time, I owed a very large amount of money. I think it was $180 million to the cartel. And it was that moment where I felt like I was...
See, now when he say right there that he owe, I don't think y'all are reading that in the same sense that he's saying it. It ain't like he just incurs on-running debt. You know what I'm saying? These debts get taken care of, and then it's like emptying your bank account every day, dog. Get to work, flip the money.
Crossing the line that I shouldn't have been a part of. But Mencho, who is now the head of the Cartel Nueva Generación, was tasked with coming to save us. And he didn't come save us in a nice way.
Yeah.
There was probably 12 to 14 federal officers, and I would say maybe 80 cartel members blocked the roadway with AK-47 rocket launchers.
Holy shit, to save you.
To save my brother and I.
He just said, holy shit, like who does he think he's facing?
Wow. So you were being extorted by the local police.
I had been extorted. I was being extorted, and what I didn't want at that time, even though the Sinaloa cartel ran the place where I lived in, which was Puerto Vallarta, I didn't want to tell the higher ups because I didn't want something to happen to that officer and me be in the middle. So I decided to pay the bribe, because even law enforcement officers, if they're on the take, before they try to extort anyone, they have to ask for permission. They have to call in and say, hey, we have this individual. Do you know who he is? If he would have done that, then he would have known to, hey, stay away from him. And he didn't. And he was extorting us. The bribe went from him wanting $100,000 a month to him asking for $1 million payment, in which we said no to. And they arrested us.
Yeah.
The night out. It was terrifying because on one of those calls, he basically said, look, they're going to come get you, and I will tell you one thing. Those law enforcement officers are not law enforcement officers. The first thing they're going to do is kill you and your brother. They're not going to go out like you think. And I felt like at that time, like someone was making a decision for me that I didn't have control of. And that was scary because I know who I'm dealing with, and I know what type of life it was. And it was.
So that phone call was from Jalisco?
That phone call, no, at that time, it was still the Sinaloa Cartel.
Okay.
And that faction was El Milenio Cartel. So El Milenio Cartel was under the Sinaloa Cartel. So that call went, the first person that called me was Arturo Beltran Leiva on direct phone from the federal police. And then Chapo, Mayo, all cooperated. They tried to bribe him with a $5 million bribe. But at that time, from my understanding, was that the marshals were already on their way to pick us up, and they didn't want to risk it.
Okay, so you have two cartels trying to save you. One, Sinaloa, kind of backed off. These other guys sent 80.
With the test, yeah.
They sent 80 sicarios in there.
And not just 80 sicarios, they sent Mencho himself.
Wow.
At that time, he ran the plaza there, and he basically said that because he was the the boss there, that he felt like it was his responsibility, and he showed up himself.
That's crazy.
With AK in hand.
What happened?
With an AK in hand, boy. It's stranger than fiction, boy. Make the movie.
A gunfight, or did the police just give up?
They just gave up. They surrounded the vehicles and made them get off their vehicles. 12 officers, they were in SWAT gear, and made them give up their weapons and laid them on the floor. And In return, what they did was, because they didn't want to have issues with, you know, bigger, like Mexico City, they replaced us with two persons that didn't look nothing like us.
Okie dokes.
And replaced us and said, here, those are the twins for you.
No, really? So like they still had two guys.
And yeah, that was, I think, that the first time.
How did they pick those two guys?
There's this story here is unbelievable. It was one of the Sicarios, one of the hitmen. I remember they said, well, they prepared me just in case I have to go to prison for you guys. It's okay. He said, they gave us a bottle of tequila each. They gave us some drugs to do.
Bruh.
So it's great.
Yeah,
we're ready. And I mean, even me, who was part of the organization, like and on the, you know, being the drug traffickers we were, I never got to experience that type of corruption. But besides it being done in the middle of a broad daylight in a tourist city like Puerto Vallarta.
This all happened in Puerto Vallarta?
Yes. And we actually got on a caravan of like 30, 40 vehicles. And I'll never forget me being in a vehicle with Mencho, and there's a military checkpoint. Now my heart is beating. I'm a wreck already. There's too much going on. And I remember I said, you know, the military checkpoint's coming up. He said, okay.
I looked over, Ian said, two coked up okie dokes. They stuffed two coked up, tequila up okie dokes in the back of the car and said, go on your way.
Bulletproof, you know, vest. They have their Berchetas, radios.
So they're pulling up on a military checkpoint.
Pickups full of armed men. Waved. Military waves us through. At that point, I was shocked because, from my understanding, those military officers were never on the take. A caravan of 30, 40 vehicles were armed. And you have a, you know, military checkpoint with a battalion of soldiers.
Yeah.
Looking at us right by. And he didn't stop there. He was ordered to get us back to home safely. So they separated my brother and I into two different bulletproof vehicles. And we had a federal police escort us from Vallarta back to Guadalajara. Both of us. 2 cars each. To the front of our doorsteps.
That's a good service. Jeez.
And I think, you know, even at that point, it was a scary moment. It was scary in a lot of ways. You know, you can imagine all the things that could go wrong. And
not to mention that what he didn't share with him is that their wives were with them on that ride. You know what I'm saying? Mind you, they got sent home earlier, and the boys ended up coming home on their own later. But
just being able to witness and be a part of what corruption was at that time.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, me understanding the other side of it was for our drugs that was being brought from Mexico City to the border. You know, you make a phone call and say, hey,
yeah,
we're going to pass by from 6 to 8, make sure the road's clear.
Right. I guess, yeah, I get what you're saying. It's like, on the one hand, you kind of have it made. You get arrested, and you've got literally the two extremely powerful cartels both trying to save you, and then utilizing their connections within government to protect you. So that's got to feel a little good. But on the other hand, it also what it showed you is that there's so much outside of your control, and that you're lucky today, but like tomorrow could be a totally different thing.
I mean, those are like moments that you go through. And I think for my brother and I having some type of intelligence, it's like the part of the cartel doing that for us was more scarier to me than anything, because I kind of seen the value we were bringing, which, you know, if it was, you know, a regular business, you'd be happy about, but that value means more responsibility, means that on the opposite end, it's only going to get worse.
Yeah.
You know, I didn't have $180 million at hand to pay for, you know, if someone was going to pay for that, and it was going to be my family. And, you know, all that added on, right? It was just a mixture of things I've been through in my life and that helped, I guess. And I was fortunate enough to trust, and I gave my life to the Lord and believing that I was going to be saved. And just sitting here with you, sir, just we're just talking about some little stories, but the fact that I'm able to be here kind of to show how what could happen when you decide to turn your life around to do good. And it's my pursuit, and it's why I started wanting to train law enforcement, because I feel like there's so much knowledge that wasn't actually given to them. I cooperated for basically 12 years. But, to me, the interagency collaboration doesn't exist.
Yeah. A lot more work to be done there.
Yes, I think that was, 8, 10 of the same agents. And we're more debriefing on like targets, investigations, but nothing in terms of, methods or what, that part of it, like the ways we actually transport the drugs, or just, the tools that we use. None of that was actually ever really taken into consideration.
No reconnaissance. They did their job. They put down their papers. They indicted who they indicted, but there was no reconnaissance. They didn't soak up any information. They didn't get the information he was trying to give them.
It left that void where, I came home and I said, you know what, this could be something where I could start that road to redemption. And I appreciate Jeremy Ellison from Dynamic Police Training. He gave me the opportunity to come in, and I know it's still kind of weird for people to know my background and think, well, how can I trust you? And I tell all the officers all the time, it's like, there's nothing that you could tell me about drug trafficking that I don't know. And I feel like with my experience and knowledge, I feel like I could give back. It's just the beginning for me, especially if I'm given those opportunities.
Well, appreciate you being here. Appreciate you doing this.
It's a privilege. Thank you.
All right.
Salute to Jay, though. He held that interview together. Gave this dude the story, stuff that we knew. We could have hip dude to it.